The brakes on that old transit bus had a sound I still hear when the house goes quiet at night. Not a squeal. Nothing so clean as a squeal. It was a wet grinding, low and patient, like something down in the wheel wells was chewing on metal that didn't want to be chewed, working at it slow, taking its time. I was in the driver's seat because nobody else in Copperkiln knew how to work the air system on a rig that old. And I'd been driving mine equipment for 19 years, hauled trucks and loaders and things 10 times the size of a school bus. So a bus felt like a toy in my hands. That's what I told the 11 people sitting behind me in the dark. It's just a toy, folks. I've driven bigger than this to lunch. I said it to steady them, and it worked a little, the way a calm voice works on frightened animals. It felt like a toy right up until the moment the headlights swept across the switchback above Miller's Cut, and I saw that the road wasn't there anymore. Not washed out, not blocked by a slide or a fallen tree, gone. Somebody had pulled the culvert, cut the shoulder, and dropped 40 feet of mountain grade straight down into the ravine. And they'd done it neat, the way a man does a thing he's planned out in advance and had time to do right. The county road that was supposed to carry us down out of the mountains to Highway 6 simply ended in open air. And in the throw of the headlights, the far edge of the gap looked impossibly close and impossibly far away at the same time. A trick of the dark that made my stomach drop before my mind had even finished understanding what my eyes were telling it. I stopped the bus. 12 people. One working vehicle. 41 miles of switchback road at our backs. And the only way out of the mountains was a hole in the world that had not been there 3 days ago. And behind us, coming up the grade, slow and patient, were the lights of the town we'd just left. Lights that had no business moving. I want to say thank you to everyone who keeps coming back to sit with these stories. And if this is your first time here, you're welcome at this fire, same as anyone. If grounded survival stories are your kind of thing, go ahead and subscribe and leave a comment so I know you're out there in the dark listening. Now let me tell you how we ended up on that mountain in the first place, and why the last bus out of Copperkiln never reached the highway. My name is Wade Orsini. I was 51 years old that autumn, and I'd spent the better part of those years underground or working the edges of things that went underground. Copperkiln, Utah is a name you won't find on any modern map, because the mine closed in 2009 and the town went right into the ground with it, dropping from 4,000 people to a couple hundred stubborn ones who either couldn't afford to leave or couldn't stand the thought of it. I was a maintenance foreman in the years before the shutdown, and after, when there was no mine left to maintain, I became the man people called when a pump froze in January, or a generator quit at 2 in the morning, or a truck wouldn't turn over in the cold. I fixed things. That was my whole identity, if I'm being honest with you. And I've had a lot of quiet nights since, to be honest with myself. I was the man who could keep the lights on when nobody else could. I took a certain pride in it that I don't take in much anymore. That's a useful thing to be, right up until the moment the thing that's broken is people, and there's no wrench in the world that fits. The sickness came up the valley in early October, and it came the way everything came to a place like Copperkiln, late and secondhand and wrong in the details. First, it was a thing happening in Salt Lake, 90 miles and a mountain range away. The kind of news that felt like weather in another state. Then it was in Price, closer, an hour down the canyon. Then it was in the little Carbon County towns strung along the highway between us and the world. Wellington and Helper and the rest, close enough now that we started locking doors we'd left open for 20 years. The radio station out of Price went from cautious to concerned to outright frantic over the span of about 9 days. And I remember the exact shape of its dying. The last clear broadcast I heard. A man was reading evacuation routes in a flat, careful voice, the voice of somebody trying very hard to sound like a professional while his hands shook. And then he simply stopped in the middle of a sentence. Route 6, East 2. That was it. Route 6, East 2. And then a long, open carrier hum. Dead air with a faint electrical heartbeat in it, and then nothing at all. I kept the truck radio on the county emergency band for 2 more days out of pure habit, the way you keep touching a sore tooth. Static with a rhythm to it. That was the last thing the outside world ever said to Copperkiln. We didn't call it what the cities called it, because we never heard what the cities were calling it. Not really. We didn't have a name for the thing that felt true, so we mostly didn't name it at all. People got a fever. The fever burned high, higher than a body should survive, high enough to cook out whatever it was that made a person themselves. And what got up afterward wasn't sick anymore, and it wasn't a person anymore either. It was fast in short, terrible bursts, and slow the rest of the time. And it didn't feel cold or heat or fear or anything at all that I could see. And it came toward warm things, and toward sound. That was the sum of what we knew. We didn't have a laboratory or a scientist or a soul who could tell us the mechanism of it. We had a shuttered clinic staffed by a nurse named Dessa Fontaine, who was 68 years old and flatly refused to leave her post. And we had a hardware store. And we had a bar called the Deep Shaft that had somehow outlived the mine that named it. And we had the picked-over bones of a town that used to matter to somebody. There were, by the time the sickness reached us, maybe 40 people still living in Copperkiln. By the night of the bus, there were 12 who could still think straight and act on it. The rest had died, or turned, or simply walked off into the pinyon and juniper on the slopes above town and never came back. In the 2 weeks between the fever crossing our line and the night I'm telling you about. The plan wasn't mine. I want that on the record, though there's nobody left to keep a record for. The plan belonged to Harlan Sutter, and I went along with it, and that going along is a thing I'll carry in my chest for however many years I've got left. Harlan had been the county road supervisor before the mine closed, and after the shutdown, he drifted into being the closest thing Copperkiln had to a mayor, which mostly meant he was the loudest man in any given room, and the room had gotten too tired to argue. He was 60 years old, wide across the shoulders and gone soft in the middle, with a voice built for shouting across job sites, and a lifelong habit of deciding a thing first and then explaining afterward why it had been the only sensible choice. People trusted him because he sounded like a man who had already thought it through. And to be fair, sometimes he had. That was what made him dangerous later. If Harlan had always been wrong, we'd never have followed him. It was the times he'd been right that bought him the trust he spent on the last road out of town. The plan was the bus. The old district school bus, 40 years old if it was a day, that hadn't carried a passenger since the school consolidated down the valley a decade back. It sat behind the maintenance yard, where I'd kept it more or less alive, out of sentimentality and boredom, turning the engine over every few months, keeping the batteries topped, patching what rusted through, the way a man keeps a garden he has no real use for, just to have something living to tend. Harlan's idea was simple, and it was the only idea any of us had. Load the bus and run it 41 miles down the switchback county road to the place where it met Highway 6 at a wide spot called Deer Lick Junction. Highway 6 would carry us to Green River, and Green River sat on the interstate. And the interstate meant the possibility of a National Guard checkpoint, a relief column, other survivors, or at the very least, a road wide enough and flat enough and fast enough to outrun the slow, patient thing that was eating the world one valley at a time. We couldn't stay. That much was simple truth, and I never argued it. Copperkiln's water came from a spring-fed tank up the slope that gravity fed the town, and the electric pump that lifted the spring's overflow into the tank had died 2 days before, and the tank was dropping. And without power to the pump, I couldn't lift another drop into it. The food in the shuttered grocery had been stripped down to the bare shelving and the swollen cans nobody trusted. We were running out of the basic things that keep a body alive, and there was no resupply coming, not ever again. But the thing that made us leave that specific night, the thing that lit the fuse under all of us, was the fence. I need you to understand the fence, because the fence is the reason the timing killed us. When the fever first crossed into town, in those early days before we understood that it turned the dead into something that walked, Harlan and I and 4 others had thrown up a perimeter around the residential core of Copperkiln. Not a wall. We didn't have the material or the time for a wall. We ran chain link salvage from the school and the ball field, and welded steel panels off the old mine works, and stretched mine fencing across the 2 roads that led into the neighborhoods where people still lived. And then we did the thing that saved us for 2 weeks and doomed us in 1 night. We electrified the worst stretches. I wired them into the substation transformer that still fed the town off the regional grid, because Copperkiln sat on the same long, rural, high-voltage line that had once fed 3 other towns down the valley, towns that were dead now. And the line was still hot, even though not one soul was left alive to maintain it. That's the strange truth about infrastructure. It outlives the people who built it and the people who needed it, humming along in the dark, doing its one job long after the reason for the job is gone. The fence held. For 14 days it held, because the electrified sections did something to them, some reaction to the current that I never understood and never will. The ones that came down out of the hills at night would drift toward the sound and the warmth of us, and they'd hit the wire, and something in the shock would make them recoil and stagger back and lose the thread of whatever pulled them, and they'd wander off. As long as the fence had power, we had a town, a small one, a dying one, running down on water and food and hope, but a place where a man could close his eyes at night and expect to open them in the morning. The night of the bus, at exactly 9:40 in the evening, the power died. Not the fence power, all of it. Every light in Copperkiln went out at once, the street lights and the few lit windows and the red glow of the substation indicators. All of it snuffed in the same instant. And I knew what it meant before Harlan's radio even had time to crackle in my hand. Somewhere down the valley, 40 or 80 miles away, a substation had finally failed with nobody to reset the breakers, or a line had come down across a road, or a transformer had cooked itself, and the grid that had kept us alive was gone, and it was never coming back, because there was nobody left alive to climb the poles and fix it. I was the man who fixed things, and I could not fix 100 miles of dead high-voltage line with a pickup truck and a toolbox and a headlamp. But I'd built a cushion. I'd known for years that grid power out here was fragile. One storm or one drunk driver into a pole away from failing. So when we electrified the fence, I'd wired in a battery backup, a bank of deep-cycle marine batteries I'd scavenged from boats and RVs, charged off the grid and held in reserve for exactly this. The backup gave us time. It did not give us much. I'd built that bank, and I'd tested it, and I knew its limits the way I knew my own hands. Under the full load of the electrified sections, the bank would hold for about 90 minutes. 90 minutes, and then the wire would go cold, and Copperkiln would stop being a fortress and go back to being what it really was. An open scatter of houses on a dark mountain with nothing between the living and whatever was in the pinyon. So at 9:40, the clock started. And every single person in Copperkiln who could still think knew that it had started. Because for 2 solid weeks I had told them over and over, standing in the shuttered clinic that we used for meetings, that the backup was 90 minutes and not 1 minute more. We had 90 minutes to get 12 living people onto a 40-year-old bus and off the mountain. Or we would be trying to do it in full dark with the fence dead and the whole town standing open behind us. We did it in 55, I'll give us that much. 55 minutes from the lights dying to the bus rolling out through the north gate. 12 souls aboard. The gate dragged shut and chained behind us by a man named Cyrus Vane, who then turned and ran and caught the folding door as I was already pulling away, swinging up onto the step and hanging there a moment, breathing like a bellows, before he found a seat. Let me tell you who was on that bus, because you'll need to carry them with you the rest of the way. There was me, driving. There was Harlan Sutter in the front seat behind me and to my right, with an old pump shotgun laid across his knees and a county road atlas he didn't need, because he'd graded most of these roads himself in another life. There was Dessa Fontaine, the nurse, 68 and steady as a bridge piling. Sitting mid-bus with a heavy canvas bag of medical supplies she'd stripped off the clinic's shelves with her own hands. Next to her sat a boy named Toby Reyes, 9 years old, whose mother had turned 4 days before and whose father was somewhere down the valley and almost certainly gone. Dessa had taken the boy the way you take in a stray that shows up at your door in a storm, because she looked at him and simply could not do otherwise. There was Cyrus Vane, 40 years old, who'd driven long-haul freight before the mine towns dried up and the loads stopped coming, and who'd moved back to Copperkiln to care for a father who had since died of nothing more dramatic than old age in the middle of all this dying, which somehow made it lonelier. Cyrus was quiet and watchful and good with his hands, and I trusted him more than I trusted Harlan, though I kept that opinion to myself, the way you keep a lot of opinions to yourself in a small town. There was a couple, the Bandaris, Ravi and Mina, both in their 50s, who'd run Copperkiln's one motel back when the mine brought through enough traveling men to fill it. They were frightened in a quiet, dignified way, holding hands across the aisle, saying nothing, taking up as little room in the world as they could. There was a woman named Lorena Skye, somewhere in her middle 30s, who'd fought wildland fire for the state until a back injury put her out of it, and who was the only person on that bus besides me who understood, right down in the bone, that the fence backup running down meant we were on a clock that did not stop just because we'd cleared the gate. She sat behind Cyrus and watched the mirrors, and I was glad of her. There was an old man everyone in town called Preacher, though in all my years I never learned whether he'd ever actually preached anything. And he prayed under his breath the entire drive, a low, steady murmur that never once broke rhythm. There were 2 brothers, Denny and Colt Frayne, in their 20s, who'd survived the last 2 weeks by being mean and lucky in roughly equal measure, and whom I didn't much like but couldn't in good conscience leave. And there was Astrid Voll, 60 years old, the town's postmaster for 30 of those years, who carried a paper ledger and a stub of pencil and had been writing down the name of every single person who died, because she said more than once that somebody had to. And it might as well be the one person left in town who knew how to spell them all correctly. 12, on a bus built to carry 54, rolling down a mountain in full dark, with the town going open behind us and 41 miles of switchback ahead. The first 20 miles were the easy part, and even in the middle of them, I knew that easy was a trick the mountain was playing on us, the way it lets you get comfortable right before it takes something. The county road out of Copperkiln drops through 3 sets of switchbacks before it reaches the long, straight run along Antler Creek. And these are the kind of switchbacks where you cannot see the roadbed below you until you're already on it, the grade folding back on itself so tight that the headlights of your own vehicle can't reach around the turn. I'd driven that road 1,000 times in daylight, hauling equipment and hauling myself home. At night, in a bus, with headlights that only reached so far into the trees, it was like driving down into a throat. The timber came right down to the shoulder on both sides, black pinyon and juniper crowding in. And the creek ran somewhere off to the right, a sound more than a sight. And every so often the beams would sweep across the brush and catch 2 small points of shine low to the ground, and I'd know that something was standing there, watching us go by. Not chasing, just watching, the way they watched. They didn't run down a thing that moved fast. They waited, in that patient animal way, for the thing to stop. "How's the fuel?" Harlan said. It wasn't really a question. It was Harlan needing to be heard managing the situation. The way a foreman calls out numbers on a site he's already sure is running fine, just to be the voice that called them. I glanced at the gauge in the green dashboard glow. 3/4, I said. It's plenty. 41 miles is nothing. On flat ground, it's nothing. On this? He gestured at the black windshield. It's downhill most of the way, Harlan. We coast half of it. I filled her myself this afternoon off the yard tank. We'll roll into Green River with fuel to spare. He grunted, the sound a man makes when he wanted to keep the conversation going and can't find the handle for it, and he settled back into his seat with the shotgun. I watched Toby in the big convex mirror over the windshield. The boy hadn't said one word since we'd boarded. Not a syllable. He sat with his forehead pressed against the cold black glass, watching the dark slide past. And Dessa had one arm around his narrow shoulders. And I thought, not for the first time that week, that the very worst thing about all of this was not the dying. It was the children who had to sit and watch it happen, and were old enough to understand exactly what they were watching. Lorena leaned forward from her seat, keeping her voice down under the drone of the engine so it wouldn't carry to the frightened people in the back. "You know the road past Antler Creek?" "Better than I know my own kitchen. Drove it in every kind of weather there is." "Anywhere it necks down? Any place we could get boxed in with no room to work?" I liked her for asking that. It was the right question, the question a person who'd been in tight places before knew to ask. "Miller's Cut," I said. "Bottom of the last set of switchbacks, about mile 30. The road runs across a shelf that was blasted out of the grade back when they built it. Solid rock cliff on the left, a straight drop into the ravine on the right. And a culvert carries the creek under the road bed in the middle of it. If anything on this whole road is going to be a problem, it's the cut. But it's paved, and it's straight through. And if it's clear, we're across it in 90 seconds, and then it's flat, easy road all the way to the junction. And if it's not clear?" I didn't have an answer to give her, so I didn't give one. Harlan was listening now. I could feel it, and I didn't want to say out loud the thing all three of us already knew, which was that we had exactly one road and no possible way to turn a 54-passenger bus around on a rock shelf with a cliff on one side and 40 feet of nothing on the other. Some problems you don't name in front of frightened people. You just carry them in your chest and hope you never have to open your mouth about them. We came down through the second set of switchbacks, and I felt the whole weight of the bus want to run away downhill. The mass of it pushing forward on the grade, gravity leaning on us. And I rode the brakes and heard that wet grinding start up again in the wheel wells, the sound that lives in my quiet houses now. The pads were shot. I'd known they were shot. I'd meant to change them the very week the fever came up the valley. Had the new pads sitting in a box on my workbench. And then there'd been no week anymore. Only days. Only the 90-minute clock ticking in the back of my skull. I downshifted, dropping the old transmission down a gear so the engine's compression could hold us back instead of the brakes, and the grinding eased off, and Harlan turned his head to look at me. That normal, that sound? It's fine as long as I don't have to stop her hard. And if you do have to stop hard, then let's, the both of us, hope I don't. We came off the bottom of the switchbacks and hit the Antler Creek straight away, and the road leveled out under us. And I let out a long breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 miles. The creek ran right alongside the road here, close enough that the headlights caught it in flashes, silver water sliding over dark stone. For a stretch of maybe 4 miles, it was almost peaceful. The bus humming along on level ground. The engine settled into an easy rhythm, the timber falling back from the shoulders so that the valley opened up wide and you could see stars overhead. Hard and clear the way they only get out, where there's no light for 100 miles to wash them out. Astrid Voll had her little flashlight on and was writing in her ledger. And I heard her ask Ravi Bhandari in a low voice how to spell a man's name. And Ravi spelled it out for her patiently, letter by letter. And it was such a small, decent, human thing. An old woman making sure she got a dead man's name right, that it put a lump in my throat I had to work to swallow down before it showed in my voice. Then Cyrus Vane, from his seat behind Lorena, said, "Wade, you're going to want to see this." And his voice was so level, so carefully flattened out, that it frightened me worse than any shout could have. A man only makes his voice that flat when he's holding something down hard. I flicked my eyes to the mirror. Cyrus had turned all the way around in his seat and was looking out the back window of the bus. And Lorena turned too. And then Harlan hauled himself up out of his seat and started down the aisle to see. And I couldn't turn because I was the one driving. So I said it out loud, sharper than I meant to. "What? What is it back there?" "Lights," Cyrus said. "Behind us, up on the switchbacks we just came down." For one warm, stupid heartbeat, hope got into me. Headlights. Somebody following us out? More of the town. I actually pictured it. More survivors. People we'd thought were lost, coming down the mountain behind us in their own trucks. A little convoy, safety in numbers. "They're not headlights," Lorena said, and the flatness had gotten into her voice now too. "Too many of them, too small. They're spread across the whole width of the grade, all up and down it." And then I understood, and the warmth went out of me all at once, and my hands went cold on the big flat wheel. They were coming down the road behind us, not one, not two, a column of them, strung out across the switchbacks, coming down out of Copperkiln on the only road there was, and the small lights weren't lights at all. They were reflection, the headlights of nothing, catching in hundreds of pairs of eyes strung across the dark grade like a constellation that had fallen out of the sky and landed on the mountainside. The town had gone open the instant the fence backup ran down, and everything that had spent 2 weeks drifting against that wire had come through the dead gaps all at once. And it had followed the one thing that moved and made noise and gave off warmth in all that dark. Us. It was following the bus. We were the loudest, brightest, warmest thing for 40 miles. And we were dragging the whole population of the dead down the mountain behind us like a comet's tail. "How far back are they?" I said. 2 switchbacks. Call it a mile of road," Lorena said. "But they're up high, so the straight line distance is a lot less than that. They're not fast, but they're not stopping either. They're just coming down." "Then we don't stop," Harlan said, loud now, pitching it for the whole bus to hear, his command voice back in full. "We don't stop, we don't slow, we run straight through to the junction, and we're gone before they clear the switchbacks. Wade, drive." I'm driving, Harlan. Then drive faster. I drive this thing any faster on this road, I put us in the creek, and then all 12 of us get to stand out there on the gravel and wait for them on foot. Is that the plan you want? He didn't have an answer for that. He went back to his seat, and a second later, I heard him work the shotgun's pump action, chunk, chunk, a hard mechanical sound in the quiet. And it was a useless thing to do. A noise to make himself feel like a man, still in control of something. And I hated him for it just a little. And I understand now, with the distance of years, that fear does exactly that to men who've built their whole lives on being the one in charge. When the real control slips out of their hands, they reach for the gesture of it. The sound of the pump, the atlas they don't need. The orders shouted at a man already doing the thing. Toby had started to cry, silently, his shoulders hitching. And Dessa had pulled him in tighter and was murmuring something low into his hair. And I caught her eye in the mirror, and she gave me a small, firm nod. The kind that says, keep it together. We are all watching you. You are the one with your hands on the wheel. So I kept it together. That was my job now, the last job I had. I drove. Have you ever been inside a vehicle that was the only thing standing between a dozen living people and something you could not outrun on foot? If you have, then you already know that what you feel isn't fear, exactly. Not the sharp kind that makes you want to run. It's a terrible, narrow focus. Every crack in the pavement, every soft place in the shoulder, every patch of gravel washed across the road becomes a life or death fact that your whole mind bends toward. Tell me down in the comments if you've ever driven a road at night, knowing in your gut that stopping meant dying. I'd genuinely like to know I'm not the only man who's felt that particular weight settle onto his hands through a steering wheel. We had 4 miles of flat road before the final set of switchbacks that dropped down into Miller's Cut. 4 miles, at the speed I dared push it, was about 6 minutes. And behind us, the whole time, that column of eyes held its distance, a mile back, neither gaining on us nor falling away. And that told me something I did not want to know. It told me they would walk down this road all night, if that's what it took. They didn't tire. They didn't get discouraged. If we got hung up anywhere, for any reason, they would simply keep coming, and they would arrive. It was never a question of whether, only of when. Cyrus came forward and crouched down in the aisle beside my seat, low, bracing himself against the sway of the bus, and pitched his voice for me alone under the engine noise. You said Miller's Cut is the choke point, the tight spot. Yeah, only real one between here and the junction. So if the cut's clear, we're fine. That's what you're telling me. If the cut's clear, we're across it in 90 seconds. And then it's flat road, and they'll never catch us. Highway 6 is wide open once we hit it. We'll open her up and be doing 60. Nothing that walks catches a bus doing 60. Cyrus was quiet a moment, and then he asked me the question I should have heard the strangeness in, and didn't. And you're sure the road at the cut is still good? The culvert, the shelf, all of it? Nobody's been down there? Nobody's touched it? It was a strange thing to ask. I know that now. At the time, I was driving a bus down into a black throat with a mile of The Walking Dead strung out behind me. And I did not have 1 square inch of room left in my head for the strangeness of a question. Who'd touch it? I said. There's nobody up here but us and what's behind us. That road's been sitting there since before you were born. Cyrus looked at me for 1 beat longer than a man needs to look at someone. Then he nodded, slow, and got up and went back to his seat without another word. And I have replayed that look 10,000 times in the years since. in every quiet house I've lived in. Because Cyrus Vane knew something in that moment, or at least he suspected it. And he was standing right there, deciding whether to say it to me. And he decided not to. And that one decision, made in the dark of a moving bus, cost us all more than I know how to measure. We came off the flat and into the last switchbacks. 3 tight turns dropping us the final grade toward the cut. And the brakes started their wet grinding again. Worse now. And I rode the engine and downshifted, and still the smell of hot brake pad came up through the floorboards, sharp and mineral, the smell of metal being ground away too fast. The bus swayed hard on the turns, the tall body of it leaning out over the drops, and I heard Meena Bandari make a small choked sound. And I called back, loud enough to reach the whole bus. "Hang on to something, folks. This part's ugly, but it's short. 90 seconds and we're on flat road." I took the turns as fast as I dared, which was already too fast, and the headlights swung wide across the grade below us as we came around. And I saw the road drop away toward the shelf where Miller's Cut ran the gap between the cliff and the ravine. And I saw that the road was not there. I've told you what it looked like, open air where the shelf should have been. The whole roadway across the cut, simply gone, dropped down into the ravine, the culvert pulled out, the shoulder cut off clean, 40 feet of grade collapsed into darkness. And my headlights reaching out across the empty gap and finding nothing at all but the far edge, close and far at the same time, floating there in the beams. I stood on the brake with both feet. I know I told you not to stop hard. I know I said it out loud to Harlan not 10 minutes before. But your body does not stop to consult what your mind knows when the road ends in air in front of you. I stood on that brake pedal with everything I had, and the wet grinding became a full metal scream. And the back end of the bus broke loose and wanted to come around and pass the front, wanted to swap ends and pitch us sideways off the shelf. And I fought it. I fought it with everything 19 years underground had ever put into my hands and my arms, counter-steering into the slide, feathering off the brake and back onto it. And the bus slewed and shuddered, and finally came to a stop crosswise on the roadbed with the front bumper hanging maybe 10 feet from the raw edge of the drop. And the engine stalled dead. And there was a silence afterward, so complete and so total that I could hear the small hitching sound of Toby Reyes trying not to cry out loud. Nobody spoke. The headlights, still burning off the battery even with the engine dead, lit the gap where the road used to be. Dust from the stop drifted through the beams, slow. Somewhere far below us, down in the black ravine, water ran over rock, an ordinary sound. A sound that had been there 1,000 years and would be there 1,000 more, indifferent to all of us. "What?" Harlan said finally. His voice had lost every ounce of its command. It came out small. "What is that? Where's the road?" "It's gone," I said. I noticed distantly that my hands would not come off the wheel. My fingers had locked around it. "The cut's gone. Somebody dropped it into the ravine." "Somebody? Somebody who? There's nobody up here. You said it yourself." He was on his feet now, coming forward, staring through the windshield at the impossible dark where his own road should have been. "Roads they don't just fall in. A road doesn't just—" "No, they don't just," I agreed. And I heard my own voice go flat and hard. The voice I used when a machine had failed, in a way that told me something ugly about the man who'd been running it. "Somebody pulled that culvert and cut that shoulder clean. This is a demolition, Harlan. This is deliberate work. This is a man who knew what he was doing and had the time and the machine to do it right. I drove this exact road 10 days ago, and the cut was solid as bedrock. Somebody did this on purpose, and they did it recent." Lorena was already up and at the folding door, one hand on the release lever. "Behind us," she said, hard and low. "Wade, the lights." I turned in the seat, my locked hands finally letting go of the wheel. Through the back window, the column of eyes had reached the top of the last set of switchbacks, the ones we'd just come down. A mile of road and 3 tight turns had stood between us and them a few minutes ago. And now that mile felt like nothing at all. Because we were not moving anymore. We were a stopped bus. We were a warm, sound-making, light-throwing thing, sitting dead on a dead-end shelf. And every single thing on that mountain was walking straight toward us out of the dark. And it had all the time in the world. "How long?" Cyrus said. He'd come forward and he was looking at me, and there was something working in his face I couldn't read in the dashboard glow. "Wade, how long until they're on us?" I did the arithmetic in my head, the way I'd done the fence math 100 times over the last 2 weeks. They moved at a walk. Call it 3 miles an hour on open road. Slower than that, picking their way down the switchbacks. A mile of road, plus the switchbacks slowing them, plus the last of the flat. 15 minutes, I said. Maybe 20 if we're lucky and they bunch up on the turns. Then they're at the door. 20 minutes, Harlan repeated, and I watched the number land on him. 20 minutes and no road. Wade. He grabbed the back of my seat and leaned in close. And for the first time all night, there was no performance in him. Just a scared old man. "You're the one who knows this mountain better than any living soul. You tell me right now, is there another way down? Anything. A fire road, a mine road, an old skid trail. Anything at all a bus could take." And there was. That was the thing. That was the awful, saving thing. My mind, running on 19 years of maintenance calls and equipment hauls all over this district, was already spinning through the map of it. And it found the answer. There was the old haul road. The one the mine had used to move ore out before the highway spur got built, back in the good years. It branched off the county road about half a mile back up the grade behind us, an unmarked cut into the timber that hardly anybody even knew was there, because it hadn't carried a load in 15 years, and the gate across its mouth was chained shut and grown over with rabbit brush and young pines. It cut down the far side of the ridge on a completely different line and came out near Deer Lick, below the junction, below the collapsed cut, on flat ground. "There's the old haul road," I said. "Half a mile back up the grade, the mine road. It runs down the other side of the ridge and comes out near Deer Lick, below the junction. It's rough as a cob. It's not paved, it's washboard gravel, and it hasn't been maintained since God was young. But a bus could do it. If it hasn't washed out somewhere, a bus could do it." "Then we back up and we take it," Harlan said, straightening. "Now, right now, turn us around, Wade." "I can't turn around here. Look where we are. There's no room. I try to turn this thing on this shelf, and I put us in the ravine on top of the road that's already down there. I have to back her up. Back up the switchbacks in the dark to the branch, and take it going forward from there. Then back up. What are you waiting for?" "Harlan? Back the bus up, Wade. Now." I got the engine to catch on the second try, the old starter grinding and then the diesel coughing to life, and I dropped it into reverse, and I started backing a 54-passenger bus up a mountain switchback in full dark with both mirrors full of oncoming eyes. If you have never done anything close to that, I cannot make the whole weight of it land on you with words alone. The bus fought me every foot of it. The grade fought me. Backing uphill, the rear of the bus wanted constantly to drift toward the ravine side. And I had Lorena Sky hanging bodily out the open folding door, watching my rear tires, and calling the edge to me in a steady firefighter's cadence. 2 feet, hold 2 feet, cut it left, more, good, hold that. 1 foot on the right now, ease it, ease it. And Cyrus at the back window, calling out the switchback turns as they came up behind us. And the whole rest of the bus leaning into the silent terror of it, while I fed the machine backward and uphill at a walking pace. And the dead came down the grade toward us, and the gap between us and them closed foot by foot. We made the first turn. I nearly lost her, the back end swinging wide out over the drop, gravel spitting off the tire into empty air. And Mina screamed once, short, and I caught it, countersteered and got the rear back onto solid road, and we ground on, backward, uphill, into the dark. We made the second turn, tighter, and I lost my temper with fear for 1 second and leaned on the horn out of a pure animal panic, and then jerked my hand off it, because the blast of it only drew them, only told them exactly where the warm thing was. And I saw the nearest of them lift their heads at the sound and come on faster. They were close enough now that in the throw of the headlights, backward down the road, I could see them not as points of shine, but as shapes, as the ragged silhouettes of people who used to be my neighbors, moving in that terrible patient walk, the first of them rounding the switchback above us. And I found the mouth of the Hall Road by memory alone, a black gap in the wall of timber on the uphill side, chained with a gate I was going to have to break to get through. "Cyrus," I said. "The gate. There's a chain and a padlock on it. I need it off, and I need it off in about 90 seconds. He was out the door before I finished the sentence, dropping down onto the gravel and running into the dark, and I saw him in the edge of the headlights, wrenching at the old gate, throwing his shoulder into it, and the chain was rusted solid, and the padlock was seized with 15 years of weather. And behind him, down the road, the first of the infected were 50 yards off and coming, 40 yards. "It's welded shut with rust," Cyrus shouted back, straining. "I can't break it by hand. I need a bar. I need something to—" "Under my seat," I called. "Pry bar, 4-footer, get it." But Lorena was already down on her knees, digging under the driver's seat where I kept it. And she came up with a 4-foot steel pry bar I'd kept there, for exactly the kind of moment no man can ever actually predict. And she was out the door and across the gravel to the gate. And she and Cyrus fed the bar through the links of the chain and threw their whole combined weight down onto the far end of it, both of them hanging off it. And the dead were 40 yards, 35, 30. And the chain would not give. And I thought, this is it. This is the exact place where it ends. And then it was not the chain that broke. It was the gatepost. The rotten old wooden gatepost snapped off clean at the ground line under the leverage, and the whole gate crashed sideways into the brush, chain and lock and all, still fastened together, dragged down by the falling post. "Go, go, get in, get in!" I was already yelling. And the two of them threw themselves back up the steps and into the bus. And I fed her backward through the open mouth of the Hall Road, off the county road, and into the trees. And young pine branches raked down both sides of the bus body with a long, tearing shriek like 100 fingernails. And I backed and cranked the wheel and worked the bus around in a 3-point turn in the slightly wider space just inside the old gate. Backing and filling on ground I couldn't see, and it took my whole soul to do it. And then we were pointed downhill on the Hall Road, headlights thrown out down a rough dirt track running away into black timber. And I dropped her into gear, and we went. And behind us, out on the county road, the first of the infected reached the fallen gate and came through the gap after us, but slower now, because the Hall Road pitched down steep and rough right away, and even they had to pick their footing on it. And for the first time in 20 minutes, we were putting real distance between ourselves and the thing behind us. Nobody cheered. That's how you know a thing is real and not a story somebody made up. In the pictures, people cheer when the hero finds the way out. On that bus, in the dark, there was only the sound of a dozen people breathing hard, and Toby crying, and the engine laboring on the rough grade, and branches scraping the windows. And somewhere down in the middle of all of it, Astrid Vall's dry, steady voice saying, "Is everyone here? I need a count. Is everyone still here?" Because the postmaster in her needed the ledger to balance, needed the number to come out right. We counted off, seat by seat, in the dark. 12. Everyone's still here. And that should have been the moment the whole story turned toward hope. We'd found another road. We were moving again. The dead were behind us and losing ground with every yard. By every measure that mattered, we were winning. But I was not thinking about winning. I was thinking about Miller's cut. I was thinking about a culvert pulled out clean and a shoulder cut off neat. 40 feet of solid grade dropped into a ravine by somebody who knew exactly how it was done sometime in the last 10 days. On the one and only road out of Copperkiln. And I was thinking about Cyrus Vane crouching down by my seat not an hour before, asking me in that careful voice whether I was sure the road at the cut was still good, whether anybody had touched it. And a cold thing was turning over slow in my chest that had nothing at all to do with the dead behind us, and everything to do with the 11 living people riding this bus with me. Somebody had known the road was gone. Somebody had known before we ever loaded up. And there was a real chance that somebody was sitting on this bus right now, in the dark, saying nothing. The Hall Road was worse than I remembered it. And I'd remembered it being bad. 15 years of no maintenance had let the mountain take it back a piece at a time. Spring runoff had cut deep channels straight across the track, washouts a foot deep that dropped the front tires with a bang and slammed everyone forward against the seatbacks. In 2 places, small slides had come down off the uphill cut and dumped rock and loose dirt across the road. And I had to nose the bus through slow, feeling the tires climb up over the debris, hearing things scrape and drag along the undercarriage that I did not want to think too hard about, because there wasn't a single thing I could do about them at the moment except keep going. The grade dropped steadily, which was good, because it meant we were shedding altitude toward Deer Lick with every yard. But the switchbacks on the Hall Road were tighter than the county roads, built for short wheelbase ore trucks and not for a long, high-bodied bus. And I had to take some of them in 2 bites, backing and filling right on the lip of drops whose bottoms I could not see. Lorena stayed at the door the whole way, watching my tires, calling the edges in that steady cadence that never once cracked. Whatever had ended her career on the fire lines, it had not touched her nerve. And I've thought since that the state lost something real the day they put her out. Cyrus stayed at the back window, watching for the eyes. And every so often he'd report forward in a low, even voice. Still behind us, but way back now, we're pulling away good. And each time he said it, I felt the whole bus let out a little more of the breath it was holding. Dessa came forward after the 3rd switchback and crouched down in the same spot where Cyrus had crouched earlier, bracing herself against the sway. Up close, in the green wash of the dashboard, she looked every single one of her 68 years. The lines cut deep around her mouth and eyes. But those eyes were steady as a level. "The boy's in shock," she said quietly, so it wouldn't carry back to him. Not medical shock, not the kind that kills you, not yet. But he watched his mother turn 4 days ago, and he hasn't said a word since, and now this on top of it. I need to keep him warm, and I need to get him talking eventually, before he goes somewhere in his head that he can't come back from easy. Is there any heat on this thing? Heater works, I said. I'll run it soon as we're down where I don't need every ounce the engine's got just to hold us on the grade. Another mile or two. She nodded and started to get up, and I said it before I could think better of it. Dessa, that road back there. Miller's Cut. She settled back down. I saw it same as you did. Somebody dropped it, on purpose. Recent work, inside 2 weeks. She was quiet a moment, weighing me the way she'd weighed 1,000 patients. You're sure of that? You're sure it wasn't the weather, a slide, the ground giving under it? I graded roads, and I maintained heavy equipment my whole working life, Dessa. That was no washout. A washout leaves a mess. It leaves the culvert hanging. It leaves rubble on the road. This was clean. Somebody pulled the culvert out whole and cut the shoulder back and let the shelf go into the ravine on purpose. You need a machine to do that. Or you need explosives, and you need to know how to place them. Either way, you need to know exactly what you're doing, and you need a reason to do it. I kept my eyes hard on the track ahead. So who from town would know how? And who'd have a reason? She thought about it, really thought, the way she did everything. Harlan graded that road for 30 years, she said slowly. Harlan would know how, and Harlan would have had access to the county machines. But Harlan's sitting right up there on this bus with the rest of us. Why in the world would a man drop the very road he was planning to drive out on? He'd have driven us all straight off the edge of it, himself included. That's the exact thing I can't figure, I admitted. But even as I said it, another shape was assembling itself in the back of my mind, cold and slow. And I did not like the shape of it at all, because there was a version of it that made a terrible kind of sense if you let it. If you were a man who had decided, quietly, early, somewhere down in himself where he didn't have to look at it straight, that the town was already finished, and you wanted to make certain that when the end came, the people around you couldn't just scatter into the hills in every direction, that they'd all have to leave together, on your plan, at your word, so that you would be at the center of it right to the last. The man who decided, the man in charge when everything else was gone. You might make sure there was only one way out of town. You might close the other ways yourself. So that when the moment finally came, every living soul in Copperkiln would need you, and only you, to lead them out. But that didn't fit either. And I turned it over and it fell apart. Because Miller's Cut was on the way out. Closing the cut didn't funnel anybody toward Harlan. Closing the cut just killed everybody who tried to leave the normal way. It was a trap with no exit, not a bottleneck that put Harlan in charge. Unless closing the cut wasn't about the people on the bus at all. Unless it was about keeping somebody else out of Copperkiln, or keeping something in. I couldn't make it come clear. There were too many pieces, and the road demanded too much of me. So I let it go, for the moment. Because the track ahead demanded everything I had. And because I've learned over a long life that a man chasing a theory around in his head while he's driving a bus down a mountain in the dark is a man about 2 seconds from making a mistake he can't take back. I filed it away. I drove. We came down out of the worst of the switchbacks and onto a long, straight descent through heavy timber, the grade easing off. And I finally let the bus run a little on the flatter pitch. And I reached over and turned on the heater. And the warm air came up through the vents, and I felt the whole bus relax by a degree. Felt the shoulders come down, all up and down the aisle. Ravi Bandari started very quietly to pray in his own language, a soft, rhythmic murmur. And up front, preacher was already murmuring his own prayer under his breath. Two entirely different faiths making almost the same sound in the dark of that bus. And I found it, strangely, more comforting than either one alone would have been. That was when the fuel gauge caught my eye. It read below a quarter, not 3/4, the way I'd filled her that afternoon. Below a quarter, and dropping toward an eighth even as I looked at it. The needle sinking in a slow, steady slide that no fuel gauge on Earth should sink like. And my stomach dropped right along with it. I'd filled that tank myself off the yard tank not 8 hours before. Filled her to 3/4 because 3/4 was all the yard tank had left to give. And 3/4 of a tank should have carried this bus to Green River and better than halfway back. 3/4 could not become an eighth in 30 miles of driving, most of it downhill and coasting. Unless we were losing it. Unless the tank was bleeding out onto the mountain behind us. And now that I was looking for it, I smelled it. Faint, under the hot brake stink in the ordinary diesel exhaust, the sharp, unmistakable smell of fuel, where there was no reason for fuel to be. A leak. Somewhere under the bus, we were bleeding the tank out onto the road. And I'd been so locked onto the driving and the dead and the collapsed cut that I had not caught the start of it. "Wade," Lorena said from the door. She'd smelled it too, that firefighter's nose for anything that burned. "Is that what I think it is?" "Fuel," I said, keeping my voice flat and level for the whole bus to hear, the way you keep it level when you're about to tell frightened people something bad. "We've got a leak. Something we scraped coming through those slides on the haul road, or a rock punched the tank, or it tore a fuel line loose. We're bleeding diesel." I watched the needle. It's going fast, faster than a pinhole. Whatever we tore it wide. How far can we make it? I did the math. And this time I did it out loud, because there was no hiding it anymore, and they'd all do the math themselves anyway. An eighth of a tank in a rig this size, losing it at whatever rate we're losing it. 10 miles, I said. Maybe 10 if the leak doesn't get any worse. Deer Lick's about 12 from here. The whole bus heard that. There was no way it couldn't. 12 miles to the junction and safety. 10 miles of fuel in the tank, dropping. The two numbers hung there in the warm dark over all our heads. And everybody on that bus did the same subtraction at the same time. Astrid Vall, from her seat, said in her dry, exact ledger keeper's voice, as if she were reading out a figure that didn't quite balance. Then we walked the last 2 miles. "Not with them behind us, we don't," Cyrus said from the back. "Not with the boy. Not with the Bandaris. They're not built for a 2-mile night hike down a mountain. On foot, in the dark, on this road. With those things somewhere back there. 2 miles is..." He stopped. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to finish it. Everybody could finish it themselves. And here is where I have to tell you the thing that turned my cold suspicion into something as solid and cold as iron. Because it happened right then, in the space of about 30 seconds. And I very nearly missed it in the middle of everything else. I said, thinking out loud, working the problem the way I worked every problem. "There's a fuel cache. At the bottom of the haul road, right about where it meets the Deer Lick spur. The mine kept a big diesel tank buried down there for the ore trucks, so that they wouldn't have to run all the way back up to town to fuel. 500 gallons, buried tank, hand pump on top of it. I checked it myself maybe 3 years ago, poking around down there, and it was still better than half full. If it's still there, and if there's still fuel in it, we top off and we drive to the junction and clean past it, all the way to Green River. And the leak doesn't matter, because we'll have miles and miles of margin. We don't have to walk one single step. And in the big mirror over the windshield, I saw Harlan Sutter go still. Not surprised still, not relieved still. The way a man goes still when he hears there's a way out he didn't know about. The stillness that came over Harlan was the stillness of a man who has just heard somebody say out loud a thing he'd been hoping to God nobody would remember. His hand tightened down on the shotgun across his knees, the knuckles going pale, and he turned his face away from me, toward the black window, and he said, "Too easy, too smooth," in the careful voice of a man laying something down gently so it doesn't make a sound. "That old tank's been bone dry for years, Wade. Don't go getting people's hopes up over nothing." You don't know that. I do know that. I pumped it dry myself for the county graders back before the shutdown. Ran it right down to the sludge at the bottom. There's nothing in it but rust and old fumes. Now, that might even have been true. A man can pump a tank dry and forget he did it. But Harlan Sutter had never once mentioned that fuel cache in 2 full weeks of planning our way out of Copperkiln. Not one time. When we'd sat in the shuttered clinic under the battery lantern, drawing the route on a paper county map, arguing back and forth over the county road, I had personally raised the Hall Road as a possible backup. And Harlan had shot it down flat, said it was washed out, impassable, not even worth talking about. A waste of breath. He had steered us onto the county road, and the county road only, patient and sure, the way he steered everything. And now, with us on the Hall Road anyway, forced onto it by the collapse at the cut, running on fumes, he was very quickly and very smoothly telling me that the one fuel source on that entire road was empty. I didn't say a word. I've learned in a long life exactly when to hold a card and when to lay it down. And this was a holding time. But I looked at him in the mirror, at the side of his face turned away from me toward the dark, and I thought, plain as speech, Harlan, what did you do? And I thought about a road dropped clean into a ravine and a fuel cache waved off as empty in the space of one breath, and a whole backup route called impassable for 2 weeks straight, and slowly, dimly, in the green light of that dashboard, I started to see the real shape of a plan that was not the plan Harlan Sutter had sold the town of Copperkiln. Because if the county road was the only way out, and the county road was cut clean through at Miller's Cut, then the only people who could ever leave Copperkiln alive were people who knew about the Hall Road. And the one and only person who had worked hard for 2 solid weeks to make absolutely certain that nobody in town so much as thought about the Hall Road was Harlan, which meant Harlan had a way out that he intended to use himself, alone or nearly alone. And the bus, the grand plan, the 12 of us loaded up and rolling for the highway, all of it was cover. It was theater. It was a thing to keep the town calm and busy and pointed hopefully down a road he already knew was cut in half, while he arranged his own quiet exit down a route he'd sworn to everyone was impossible. Except it had gone wrong for him. It had gone wrong because the grid power died sooner than he'd counted on. And the fence dropped onto its 90-minute clock. And in the scramble and the panic of that, the whole surviving town had ended up crammed onto the bus. And I had panicked us backward up the switchback and forced us onto the very Hall Road he'd wanted to keep for himself. He was on his own private escape route now, sitting there in the dark, with 11 people he had never once meant to bring, and a full fuel cache waiting ahead of us that he'd lied about because he wanted it for himself. I want to be careful telling you this, because I'm telling you what I pieced together, some of it in the dark of that bus and a lot of it in the long years after. And I know full well that a frightened man building a theory in the dark can build a whole monster out of nothing but shadows and his own suspicion. So I'll just tell you what happened and what was said, and you can weigh it for yourself and decide what you think Harlan Sutter was. Have you ever been trapped in a small space with a group of people and slowly, sickly realized that the real danger wasn't outside the walls at all, that it was riding right there in the seat with you. I would honestly like to know how you'd have played the hand I was holding. Would you have said it right then, out loud, in front of everyone, with the boy listening and the dead somewhere back on the mountain behind us? Or would you have held it, the way I held it, and waited to be sure? Tell me. I've turned it over 10,000 times, and I've never once been certain I did the right thing with it. The Hall Road bottomed out sooner than I'd braced myself for, the grade flattening all at once and dumping us onto the wider, more level Deer Lick Spur, an old gravel county road that ran the last stretch out toward the highway junction. The heavy timber fell back from the shoulders, the road smoothed. And there, off to the right, where the spur widened into an old graveled staging area the mine had used for turning trucks around, I saw it. Exactly where 15 years of memory told me it would be. The fuel cache. A green-painted steel cap set flush into a cracked concrete pad, level with the ground. And beside it, under a rusted lean-to roof gone orange with weather, the housing of the old hand pump. I pulled the bus up alongside it and stopped, gentle this time. And I killed the engine to save the few precious cups of diesel we had left. And in the sudden ringing quiet, the whole bus turned and looked out the right side windows at that green steel cap, like it was something holy set down in the middle of the mountain. "It's dry," Harlan said again, fast, already up out of his seat. "I told you it was. We're wasting time we don't have sitting here. We should drive on, get as far as the fuel in the tank takes us, and walk the rest with weapons up and the boy in the middle." "It'll take 2 minutes to check it," I said, cutting across him, keeping it level. 2 minutes, Harlan. Cyrus, Lorena, you two come check it with me. Everybody else stays on the bus, stays quiet, and watches the road we came down, in case those things picked up their pace. I turned in the seat and looked at Harlan Sutter square. "You too, Harlan. You stay put. Keep that shotgun pointed back up the Hall Road in case they come faster than I figured." He didn't like it. I watched him weigh it out behind his eyes, watched him try to figure whether he could insist on coming without showing his whole hand, and I watched him understand that he couldn't. That a man who insisted on being the one to check a tank he'd just sworn was empty would be telling everyone something. So he sat back down, slow, and settled the shotgun across his knees. And that told me more than anything he'd said all night. An innocent man argues to help. He can't help arguing to help. It's in him. A guilty one goes quiet and folds his hands and waits to see how much you know. The three of us went out into the cold. The night up here at the bottom of the grade was clear and dead still, the kind of mountain cold that gets into your teeth. And I could smell the bus's own leaking diesel now that I was standing in the open. A dark, spreading stain already pooling under the rear axle, catching what little light there was. We'd torn that tank open bad. Whatever was left in it was going onto the gravel by the minute. Cyrus got the pump housing open, working the rusted hasp with the pry bar, while I knelt and unscrewed the big green cap on the cache itself, my breath fogging in the beam of my headlamp. Lorena stood a little apart with her back to us, watching the mouth of the Hall Road, watching for the eyes. And when I got the cap off and shone my headlamp straight down into the black pipe, I saw fuel. Not a full tank, no, but fuel. The flat, still surface of it, maybe 4 feet down inside the pipe. Throwing my light back up at me, diesel brown and beautiful. Harlan lied, Cyrus said quietly, right at my shoulder, looking down into it beside me. "That's half full. That's more than half." "More than half," I said. I sat back on my heels in the gravel and let out a long breath that fogged and drifted away. Cyrus, back on the flat, before the cut, when you came up and crouched by my seat. You asked me, was I sure the road was still good? Was I sure nobody'd touched it? Why'd you ask me that exactly? Tell me now. Cyrus was quiet for a moment, working the pump primer with slow, careful strokes, testing the old action, drawing fuel up into the hose. Then he said, low, because 2 weeks back, before we ever built the fence, I did a supply run down the county road, went looking for anything worth grabbing in the dead towns. And I got as far as Miller's Cut, and Harlan's county truck was parked right there on the shelf. And he had the little mini excavator on a trailer behind it, the compact one, the county's. And he told me he was down there checking the culvert for storm damage. And I didn't think a thing of it at the time. Why would I? That's Harlan's whole life, checking roads. But when you said back there that the cut was gone, dropped clean, that it took a machine to do it, I remembered. Harlan, at the cut, with the excavator, 2 weeks ago, alone. The cold thing that had been turning slow in my chest all night finally turned all the way over and settled into place. And it fit, and it was heavy. He pulled it himself, I said. He dropped his own road into the ravine with the county's machine, and then he turned around and sold the whole surviving town on a plan to drive out over it. Why? Lorena said, from where she stood watching the road, not turning around. That's what I can't get past. Why would he do it? He was on the bus with the rest of us. If you hadn't known about this Hall Road, he'd have driven us all straight off the edge of that cut in the dark, himself right in the driver's seat behind you, dead with the rest of us. It doesn't make sense. And that was the question that had been eating at me for 30 miles. And now, standing over the fuel he'd sworn was dry, at the bottom of the road he'd sworn was impassable, in the cold and the dark, with the pump ticking in Cyrus's hands, I finally understood the answer all the way down, and it was worse than anything I'd guessed at. He wasn't planning to be on the bus, I said. That's the piece. Think it through. The plan was the bus, 41 miles down the county road to Highway 6. Harlan sold everybody in town on that plan, hammered it for 2 weeks, made it the only plan anybody talked about. So when the end came, everybody left alive would load onto the bus and take the county road, because that's the plan. That's the only road anyone's thinking about. And they'd hit the cut in the dark and be stuck there on the shelf with no way to turn around. And the dead would come down the switchbacks behind them the same way they came behind us. And that would be the end of Copperkiln. All of it. Every last soul. In one place, on one road, in one night. Done and over. But he'd be on the bus, Lorena said again, quieter now. No, listen to me. Harlan knew about the Hall Road, and he knew about this cache. He'd told everybody the Hall Road was washed out and impassable. And he'd have told anyone who asked that this tank was dry, same as he told me tonight. But he knew better on both counts. So Harlan's real plan, the one under the plan, was to slip away before the end came, or in the confusion of it, down this Hall Road. Alone or with whoever he chose to bring, refuel right here at this cache, and drive out clean to Green River, while the whole rest of the town died back at the cut, trapped on the road he'd cut, believing right up to the last second that they were following Harlan's good plan to safety. I heard my own voice go flat and strange in the cold. He didn't want to save the town, Lorena. He wanted the town to go someplace it couldn't come back from, all at once, quick, so he wouldn't have to stand there in Copperkiln and watch it die slow, one turned neighbor at a time, the way it was actually dying. Or maybe he just didn't want to share this road and this fuel and this one clean way out with 40 scared people. 12 of us ended up on this bus by pure accident tonight. He never meant to leave with more than a handful. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The bus's ruined tank dripped steady onto the gravel behind us. And far up the mountain, faint but unmistakable, carried down on the still cold air, I could hear them coming. The loose rattle of gravel under many uncertain feet, working their way down the haul road toward the warm, bright things sitting at the bottom of it. "We're standing on his lifeboat," Cyrus said, and his voice had gone hard and quiet. "The one he saved back for himself. And he lied about it right to our faces 10 minutes ago, because even now, even with all of us right here, he'd still rather we didn't have it." "Prime the pump the rest of the way," I said. "We're taking his lifeboat." We pumped fuel into that bus by hand, in the dark and the cold, the three of us trading off on the long steel lever while the fourth stood watch on the mouth of the haul road. And it was slow, back-breaking, agonizing work. The diesel gurgling up and through the old cracked hose a gallon at a time, while the sound of the dead on the grade above us grew from a suggestion to a certainty to a threat. 40 gallons, 50. Cyrus pumped until his arm gave out and I took over. And then Lorena took over from me, and we watched the fuel gauge on the dash creep up off empty and climb, past a quarter, toward half, enough to reach Green River twice over. Enough that the leak wouldn't matter a damn because we'd simply outdrive it, top off from the cache again if we had to. But we'd have miles and miles and miles of margin either way. And the whole time, I was aware of Harlan Sutter watching us from the bus. I could see the shape of him in the driver's side window. The shotgun, a darker line laid across his lap. His face turned toward us. And I knew that he knew that I knew. The fuel we were pumping into the tank was the proof of it. There was no explaining away half a tank of good diesel out of a cache he'd sworn on his life was bone dry. He was going to have to reckon with that. And so was I. And I did not have the first idea how that reckoning was going to go. With a man who had been willing to drop a road on his own neighbors to spare himself the sight of them dying slow. Here's the thing I keep circling back to, all these years later, in the quiet. I don't believe Harlan Sutter was evil in the clean, simple way you'd want a villain in a story to be evil. I think he was a proud man who had run all the way out of ways to be in charge of a thing that could not be controlled by any man. And somewhere down inside him, a decision had formed in the dark where he didn't have to look at it. That if Copperkiln was going to die anyway, then it ought to die on his terms, quick and clean and following his plan, rather than the slow, ugly way it was actually dying, one fevered neighbor at a time. And I think he told himself, in whatever words a man uses for that dropping the cut and keeping the haul road back was a kind of mercy, a quick, clean end for the many, and a way out for himself and a chosen few. A man can talk himself into just about anything on God's earth if he's scared enough and proud enough, and if he gets to be the one who decides. But mercy that you keep a secret isn't mercy. There's no such thing. Mercy you hide and lie about and keep the fuel for yourself. That's just murder that thinks well of itself. We pumped until the gauge read past half, and I called it, and we capped the cache, and we climbed back up the steps into the bus, and the air inside had changed while we were out there. They'd heard something, or felt it in the length of time we'd taken, in the low, hard tones our voices had carried in on. Astrid Voll was looking straight at me with those steady postmaster's eyes. Her pencil stopped on the page. Dessa had pulled Toby in closer against her side. Even the Frayne brothers, Denny and Colt, who'd spent the whole night slouched and sullen in the back, had come up straight and gone watchful, and Harlan sat in his seat with the shotgun across his knees. And he looked up at me as I came down the aisle. And he got the first word in before I could, quick, laying it down easy, the way he laid everything down. So it had fuel after all. Well, I was wrong then. My memory's not what it used to be, Wade. None of us are as sharp as we were. Doesn't change a thing that matters. We've got the fuel. That's all to the good. Let's get back on the road. Your memory's just fine, Harlan, I said. I sat down in the driver's seat, but I didn't reach for the key. I turned in it so I could see the whole bus, and I kept my voice level, and I let it carry. You knew that cache had fuel in it. You knew the Hall Road was passable. You told every soul in this town different for 2 solid weeks. And you dropped Miller's Cut yourself with the county's mini excavator 10 days before you sold this whole town on the plan to drive out over it. The bus went dead silent. The heater ticked. Somebody, one of the Bandaris, drew a sharp breath. Cyrus saw you at the cut with the machine, I went on, still level, still even, watching his face. 2 weeks ago, you told him you were checking the culvert. You want to tell these people that? Because the culvert's at the bottom of the ravine now, along with 40 feet of road. And if we'd stuck to your plan, every single person on this bus would be dead on that shelf right now, with the dead coming down the switchbacks onto us. You didn't build us a way out, Harlan. You built us a trap, and you called it an escape, and you kept the real way out for yourself. Harlan's face did several things in a row. I watched him run through them like a man flipping fast through a deck of cards, looking for one he could play. I watched him decide whether to bluster it, whether to rage and turn it around on me, whether to just flatly deny the whole thing. And I watched the moment he understood that there was nothing left in the deck, nothing to hold up. The fuel in the tank behind him was the whole game, and it was already played. His big shoulders came down. All at once, he looked older than Dessa, older than Preacher, older than the mountain. And what he finally said was not one single thing I'd braced myself for. "You don't know what it is," he said, low and rough, not looking at me, looking down at his own hands wrapped around that shotgun. "You don't know what it is to watch a place you built with your own 2 hands go rotten 1 person at a time. To bury the same people you graded roads for and plowed out in blizzards for 30 years. To wake up every morning and hear on the radio that the whole state's gone, the guard's gone. There's no help coming, not ever, not once. And to know for a stone fact that every single soul in that town is going to die scared and die slow, turning one by one, until there's just one left. Just one, alone, in the dark. With all of them." He turned the gun a little in his hands. I couldn't do it. I could not stand there and watch it happen slow. I told myself, if we all go out together, all at once, fast, on the road, following a good plan, at least it's clean. At least it's over quick. At least nobody has to be the last one. Nobody has to be alone at the end. "And you'd drive away down the Hall Road," I said. "So you wouldn't have to be there for the clean, fast end you'd arrange for everybody else. You'd be the one that lived to not watch it." "Somebody had to carry it out," he said, and there were tears on his face now, sliding down into the deep lines of it, an old proud man crying in the dark of a bus he'd meant to be a coffin. Somebody had to get out and remember it happened, that it was real, that they were real. I was going to remember. I was going to remember every one of them by name. "Astrid's already doing that," I said. And I nodded down the aisle at her, at the ledger open in her lap. "She's got a ledger. She writes down every name, spelled right. She's been doing it this whole time, and she didn't have to drop a road on one living person to do it." Nobody spoke. Astrid looked down at her ledger and then back up at Harlan, and her face didn't have hate in it, or forgiveness either, just a kind of terrible, tired accounting. And then, from the back of the bus, The sound of the dead on the Hall Road resolved out of the dark, close now, the first ragged shapes of them appearing at the very edge of where the headlights reached down the grade, coming down onto the flat of the Deerlick Spur. And Lorena Sky said, quiet and hard and final, "Wade, we are all the way out of time to be having this conversation. Drive." So here is the decision I had to make, and I'm going to lay it out for you straight and plain, because it is the whole reason I've told you any of this tonight. I had a bus with better than half a tank of fuel and a clear flat road running out to Green River. I had 11 people I could still get there alive. And I had Harlan Sutter sitting up front with a loaded shotgun, the man who had tried to arrange the deaths of every one of us. The dead were 60 yards back down the spur and closing at their steady walk. I had maybe 90 seconds before the choke of it, before they were at the door of the bus. And inside those 90 seconds, I had to decide what to do about the man who had betrayed us all. I could put him off the bus, leave Harlan Sutter standing on the gravel of the Deerlick Spur with his shotgun and his reasons, and let the mountain have him the way he'd meant it to have the rest of us. And part of me wanted exactly that. The cold part. The part that had done the fence math and the fuel math and every other hard, cold sum of the last 2 weeks. He'd earned it. 11 living lives, and every one of them had come within 90 seconds of ending on the shelf at Miller's Cut, because of him and what he'd done with a machine and a lie. I could keep him on the bus and deal with him later at Green River, hand him over to whatever authority might still be standing there, if any of it was, and let other people be his judge. Or I could do the thing that a proud man like Harlan Sutter would understand all the way down, and give him the choice himself. I turned the key. The old diesel caught and rumbled. I put the bus in gear. And I said, without turning around, loud enough for the whole bus to hear every word, "Harlan, there's a fuel cache right back there, and a road that you know how to drive better than any man alive. You wanted a clean end. You wanted to be the one who decides how it goes. All right. I'm not going to put you off this bus with my own hands. And I'm not going to haul you all the way to Green River to sit in a chair and be judged. I'm going to give you the door. It opens when I say the word. You get exactly 1 second to decide whether the man who drops a road on his own neighbors gets to ride out of here with them or not. I do not know to this day whether that was mercy or cruelty or nothing but cowardice, wearing the borrowed clothes of a hard, brave choice. I have turned it over 10,000 times in 10,000 quiet nights. I gave a broken man his own logic back and made him swallow it whole. Maybe I should have just driven and let him live and let him sit with what he'd done in the plain, hard daylight of Green River in front of people, forever. Maybe I should have put him off the bus myself, with my own hands, and owned it, and not pretended for 1 second that it was his choice to make. I gave him the door because I could not stand to be the man who judged him. And handing another man a decision so that you don't have to be the one who made it is its own particular kind of failing. And I know that now. And I knew it a little even then. What Harlan Sutter did was set the shotgun down on the seat beside him. Careful, both hands, like he was setting down something that had never really belonged to him in the first place. And he said, not to me, to the bus, "The boy, Toby, he's got no people left in this world. When you get where you're going, somebody's going to need to." And Dessa said, from the middle of the bus, fierce and low, cutting him clean off, "He's got me. He's had me since the minute I picked him up. You don't get to worry about that boy now. Not you." Harlan nodded slowly, taking it, and he didn't argue. And he said to me, quiet, "Open the door, Wade." And I want to tell you that I argued with him. I want to tell you that in that last second, with the dead 30 yards off and closing, I said, "No, stay, sit down. We'll sort all of this out later. Nobody gets left on this mountain tonight. But the plain truth, the truth I've carried, is that I opened the door. I reached over and I worked the lever, and the folding door swung open, and the cold came pouring in. And Harlan Sutter stood up in the aisle of the bus he'd meant to make a coffin for his whole town, and he walked forward to the front of it, and he stopped beside my seat for just a moment, and he leaned down and said, "Quiet, just for me. You'd have made a better mayor than I ever was, Wade. You just never once wanted to have to decide anything." And then he stepped down and out onto the gravel, into the dark. And I pulled the lever and closed the door behind him. And I drove. I did not look in the mirror. I have been grateful, in a hard, bitter way, for the dark of that night, because it meant there was nothing to see back there, even if I had looked. And I did not look. I drove that bus off the Deer Lick Spur and out onto Highway 6 on the fuel Harlan Sutter had saved back for himself. And the dead fell away behind us, fast, because we were fast now. Fast on flat, wide pavement, doing 50 and then 60. And they were slow. And there were fewer of them down here than the whole column that had come off the mountain, because most of that column was still working its slow, patient way down the haul road we'd left behind us in the dark. Green River was 40 miles down the highway, and the whole way there nobody on that bus spoke above a murmur. Toby Reyes fell asleep against Dessa's side somewhere around the halfway point, worn all the way out. And Dessa didn't move a muscle for fear of waking him. Astrid Vall took out her ledger, and by the small beam of her flashlight, she wrote, slow and careful, and I watched her do it in the mirror. And I knew exactly what name she was writing down. And I did not say one word to stop her. Harlan Sutter had wanted somebody to remember that it happened, that they were real. He got that much in the end, not one bit the way he'd wanted it. But he got it. The junction where the spur met Highway 6 was empty and dark. Green River, when we finally rolled into it just before dawn, was mostly empty and dark too, but not entirely. And that is a story for another night, because we found people there, a few of them, holed up in the old motel down by the river. And they took us in, all 11 of us. And the fuel that one man had hidden away for himself alone carried 12 living people to a place where they could keep on living. 11, and the memory of the 12th. I've thought a long time about the last thing Harlan said to me, leaning down by my seat in the cold, that I never once wanted to have to decide anything. He was wrong, but he wasn't all the way wrong. And that's the part that's kept me up. I'd spent my whole life fixing things, machines and systems, pumps and generators and old buses, because a machine never once asks you to judge it. A machine just asks you to understand it and set it right, and if you're patient and you're careful and you know your trade, you can. People are harder than any machine ever built. People make you decide who rides and who walks, who gets carried and who gets left standing on the gravel. And there's no manual anywhere for that. No torque spec, no wiring diagram. And no matter what you finally choose, you're wrong in some way that you will turn over in your hands for the rest of the nights you've got left. Harlan dropped a road because he couldn't bear to stand and watch his town die slow. I opened a door because I couldn't bear to be the man who carried a traitor to judgment. And I couldn't bear to be the man who threw him to the dark with my own hands either. We were both of us, in the end, men trying to duck the whole weight of a decision by dressing it up as something cleaner than it was. His killed more people than mine did. That's the only real difference I've ever been able to find between what Harlan Sutter did and what I did. And it is not near as big a difference as I would like it to be. So I'll leave you tonight with the question I have never once been able to answer for myself. And I mean this. I truly want to hear what you think about it, because you weren't on that bus, and maybe the distance makes it clearer than it's ever been for me. A man betrayed you and 11 other people. He dropped the only road out of town into a ravine, and he lied about it for 2 solid weeks, and he sold you a plan that was a trap from the first word, all because he couldn't stand to watch the slow end and wanted a clean, fast one for everybody except himself. And now the dead are 30 yards off and closing, and you've got 90 seconds and a full tank and a clear road. And this man's whole fate is sitting right there in your hands, and no one else's. What do you do with him? Do you carry him out and let him answer for it later, in the daylight, in front of people? Do you put him off the bus yourself with your own hands and own it? Or do you do exactly what I did and hand him the door and call it his choice so that it doesn't have to be yours? Tell me down in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from tonight too, because I found over the years that it genuinely helps to know there are people out there in the dark, hearing this, thinking it through alongside me. And tell me honest, because after all this time, I still do not know the answer myself. Did I do the right thing on the Deerlick Spur that night? Or did I only find a quieter, cleaner way to leave a man to the mountain? The bus made it to Green River. That was the promise, and I kept it. But the road out of Copperkiln took a great deal more than fuel to travel. And I've been paying the difference on it ever since, in the quiet of houses, where the only sound left is the memory of brakes that didn't want to stop, and a door I opened with my own hand, and a proud old man who walked through it into the dark because I let him believe, right to the end, that it was his own idea. Stay close if stories like this one are your kind of thing. There are other roads down off that mountain, and I remember every last one of them now, every single one.